Good morning, everybody. My name is EVA.
I'm Miguel.
And I'm Renee, and we're your hosts. Welcome to this election season's final episode of Signals in the Noise, daily insights into trends across the narrative landscape.
And what do we mean by narrative landscape? Well, conversations unfold all around us, reinforcing ideas, beliefs, and values that we interact with every day. We know narrative is not static. Stories and messages can both trickle up and trickle down from local to national, from politicians to celebrities, and from influencers and micro influencers who spread information in both centralized and decentralized ways.
Our team combs through news articles, social media content, and websites to dissect those pieces of content to identify conversations, messages, and stories. This allows us to identify the shape and color of how meaning is made in the landscape in which we're all organizing and communicating. This is what we call monitoring the narrative weather, and we are your resident meteorologists tracking the narrative weather across the country.
So today's show is going to look just a little bit different. This season, we walk you through the latest, where we covered stories of importance. We walk you through hot takes, where we looked at viral content, and On the Radar, a segment where we looked at emerging stories in the landscape. So because today is the last episode of Signals in the Noise for this election season, very sad, we thought it would be best to look back over the cycle and summarize the narrative threads that we saw moving throughout the landscape. Y'all ready to take a look back? How y'all feeling?
I think we should dive in. Let's get into
Okay,
So,
let's get into it.
it.
The latest. So we really appreciate y'all for rolling with us for Signals in the Noise in our national pilot. Over the last 10 days, we've been able to identify a particular set of narratives that are threaded throughout the conversations, messages, and stories that we've tracked surrounding the 2020 election. Whether we've seen them in our state-specific work, shout out to our friends in Florida, or the data that we've analyzed across the country, we know that the narratives are often the same although the content changes. Ideas about the role of government, whether it's around COVID, voting, or protecting democracy, positionality and power of Black folks and people of color in the United States in the 21st century, the role of workers in the economy, white supremacy and white nationalism, the rule of law and law and order, all shape the narrative landscape that we're contending with.
right. And just to reiterate for folks, we're not actually going through the latest right now. We're going through a summary of all the narratives that we saw through this past election season.
Thanks,
Also,
Nikki.
no problem. And some of these narratives operated at the same time and are braided together in all content we consume and interact with. What the role of biased AI, supergiant social media corporations, and new platforms emerging every day, the media ecosystem continues to transform rapidly before us, fragmenting audiences and hyper tailoring content. As stories come in, human beings have to filter through the information they see and check how the stories or challenge their biases and figure out what is worth believing.
Okay, so like whether or not we should wear a mask in the middle of a pandemic? Is that what you're
Yeah,
talking about here? Okay.
exactly.
Okay, great.
In this ecosystem, everyone is contending for attention or ideological dominance. Content and stories that move, jumping from radio to TV to the digital space and vice versa, latches on existing narratives, reinforcing beliefs, either spreading visions of justice and liberation, reinforcing apathy, or activating fear and distrust. This is why our listening work matters. We unearth insights that create deeper understanding of the dominant, dormant, and emerging narratives to identify opportunities to uplift progressive values into mainstream consciousness, making them common sense for more people, you know? Here are the narratives we found over the course of our work this election season.
Okay. So one narrative that we've seen gaining steam is the significance and importance of women of color leadership in building organizations and infrastructure to embolden and advance an electorate grounded in racial justice. Let's be clear, real clear, slow it down here. The Democrats would not have scored wins without the work of organizers, period. And this is connected to the idea that American democracy and economic recovery can only be possible by investing in Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other communities of color.
Exactly. And remember, y'all, electoral politics is a strategy, voting is a tactic, and voting down the ballot is one clear way that voters co sign the policies that say our lives matter.
Mhm.
Another narrative related to reimagining democracy focuses on common sense policies. Affordable housing, public education, and healthcare should be part of the common sense of society.
Absolutely, especially in the middle of a pandemic, but it's clear to me that common sense is not so common.
Mhm.
Kind of scary.
Yeah. Also, I want folks to remember that democracy can work. Government is not the
Mhm.
problem, but corporations, bad actors, and chaos agents who seek to undermine democracy are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a deep narrative in society that upholds white supremacist beliefs about Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and it becomes more nuanced around disability, gender, and class, and aims to denounce any progressive demands, policies, or candidates, often using coded language.
For sure. And we've talked about the frames of post-election violence and civil war as a white supremacist frame. It's rooted in racism and scapegoating people for organizing for Black freedom, Indigenous sovereignty, and opposing fascism as the drivers of violence in society.
Mhm.
Some of that is rooted in respectability politics and narratives that claim that individuals are solely responsible for the upward trajectory under capitalism.
You mean like the bootstrap mentality?
That's definitely right.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Well, ideas of personal responsibility and individual freedoms, in addition to anti big government sentiment, are central to misinformation and disinformation that spreads on social media, especially on COVID and the economy.
Yep.
Yep. The barrage of misinformation and disinformation on Chavismo, red baiting, and xenophobia plays on people's lived experiences and real fears, and it fabricates a socialist boogeyman through the Democratic Party, their candidates, and anyone else on the left. There was some effectiveness in voter peel-off using these messages.
Yeah, for sure. And the right's anti-democratic message of a rigged election moves for, moves several narratives forward, including the superiority of white people, the fear that white people will become obsolete, and the moving target of who belongs in the group of America.
Yep.
These narratives show the right is not interested in expanding democracy or unifying the country, but have an interest in racialized political warfare.
Hmm. We also see narratives claiming the government has the right to enforce the rule of law however it sees fits to protect the state, even if it means infringing on individual rights and privileges. The election is just another way for the GOP to exercise a power grab. We
Mhm.
saw all of these narratives play out in the landscape well before the election, and we can expect to see them afterwards because, well, that's kind of just how narratives work.
Yep.
Whew. All right, y'all. How are we feeling? Like that was a lot to summarize. Should we take a quick breather?
It was
Yeah,
a
just
lot,
a quick one, but I think that was a
jumping
really
ahead.
great summary.
Great job.
All right,
Feeling the
y'all.
energy.
I know, right? Now that we've gotten the heavier stuff out of the way, we should definitely get into our next and closing segment of the episode. Darn, so
Aw,
bittersweet.
so
All right,
quick.
let's get into the hot takes.
Let's do it. Okay, it's the last and final hot take segment, y'all. I don't know how I feel about it. I can't believe I'm saying that, but
I know.
okay, let's get through it. So, members of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party are gearing up for Georgia Senate runoffs and are going on the offensive against the accusations from moderates and centrists, blaming progressives for down ballot losses through the hashtag embrace the base. While these conversations peaked over the weekend, they still continue moving throughout the landscape.
Hmm. Hashtag Embrace the Base emerged on November 9th and peaked on November 11th, although the Twitter profile under the same name has existed since 2018. The hashtag aims to honor the communities who have been challenged by structural inequalities in the pandemic in order to vote, and challenge the Democratic Party to embrace progressive policies. Have y'all seen some of the infographics from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Because I did, and I'm kind of a big fan.
Yes, she plays no games ever. Okay.
No, and she's like, here's the data in pretty graphs in case it wasn't clear enough for the folks in the back, as well as, Americans are buying what we're selling, so get with the winning team or lose, okay? Most conversations are happening on Twitter from members of the squad, including AOC, journalist Brianna Joy Gray, Joe Sandberg, and grassroots PAC Democracy for America, to name a few.
AOC has also publicly lended support to the Asian American Advocacy Fund, Jaleo, Fair Fight Georgia, Song Power, and the New Georgia Project to help fundraise for grassroots efforts, naming them trailblazers and crushing arguments about Southern red states, echoing claims that there's really no such thing as a red state and reframing them as just voter suppressed states. I also think she's raised a couple $100,000 in the last 48 hours.
Ooh, okay. Alexa, play Money by Cardi B, okay?
I really hope that if people are watching out loud at home, like that song is playing in the background right now. I really hope that that's happening.
Now you got to backtrack for the rest of the show now.
Also, while progressives are using the momentum to stake their claim across media platforms by uplifting stories of victory and giving credit where it's due, the right has decided to use Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter and BLM at large, as their target. As of today, Fox News, Breitbart, and the New York Post have covered the email from Black Lives Matter to the President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. Conservative media is framing this story as a quote-unquote demand in exchange for the vote, which is their way of spinning BLM's ask to, quote, be actively engaged in their transitions team planning and policy work, end quote, in order to advocate for racial justice.
Big yikes all around.
Yikes.
The politics and conservative subreddits are having different conversations about BLM's letter to the Biden-Harris transition team, including debunked, and I can't say this enough, debunked misinformation on the donations being routed to the Democratic Party through Act Blue, which again was debunked. Recycled rhetoric from this summer's uprising, calling them a Marxist terrorist group, and ideological debates about defunding the police versus reforming the police.
All right, let's just say it here. The narratives that they're putting out are lazy and racist, and they point back to a belief on the assumed criminality of Black folks and other people of color. Conversations and stories on the far right hold no distinction between Black lives and other movement organizations and affinity groups. And this deep narrative in American society that equates Blackness and criminality is the narrative that the Movement for Black Lives has been bringing a multiracial coalition into motion to oppose. So it's definitely not a surprise that the right continues to undermine that, because it challenges whiteness as dominance and as an institution.
And we took a look at how some people on the left are talking about this, and different conversations are taking shape and moving. Some Twitter users with large followings are challenging the idea of engaging with the Biden and Harris administration and are pushing the idea that direct action in Minneapolis, New York, and Ferguson has been way more powerful than any appeals to the quote unquote ruling class could ever be. Yes, there's a time and a place and a role for uprisings and organizing with an eye towards narrative shift and culture change. Both are still super important and critical parts of the equation. Black, Indigenous, POC, and women and queer-led organizations around the nation invested heavily in this election, with their electoral justice efforts reaching millions of voters throughout the country. And that pushed them to vote and organize. That was a game changer, and not just for the White House, but in state houses as well.
For sure.
All over the country. And looking at the bigger picture, where does this land? A large amount of the country does not have pure radical politics. We're all capable of holding varying truths and narrative as true, even when they may contradict each other. The differences in tactics and strategies in the left often get elevated to an intractable level of splintering potential powerful coalitions because of differences in ideologies and ceding power to centrist and right forces. For wider audiences, the distinction often doesn't matter. All while there's a unified right narrative that demonizes entire groups of people through fear-mongering and drumming up racial hatred.
You know, if we want to move folks towards liberatory politics, don't we want to make sure we can take all the opportunities we can? Just some food for thought.
As for me personally, I'm holding on to the words of Professor Brittany Cooper. The problem is absolutely not progressivism. The problem is the 70 million cult-like adherents to Trump who looked at the last 4 years and said, more, please. Black and Latinx and Indigenous people did not risk their lives to vote for the lesser of two evils during a pandemic, to be chastised into holding centrist positions that honestly do not slap anymore. They just don't slap.
Nope.
For real. And folks voted for minimum wage increases, decriminalization, enfranchisement, and all the progressives won their re-election campaigns. And all of that, while all the Democrats could do was regurgitate Trumpian talking points. And you're supposed to reflect the party that wants unity. Come on, y'all. That's big yikes, okay? Actually, you know what? That's some whack-ass politics. WAP, if you will.
Not WAP.
Not WAP.
But I agree, though. Democrats really need to do some soul searching and stop ignoring their growing base. And if they don't get it together, we may actually begin to see some real fracturing in the party in the coming years.
Yes. It's funny you mentioned fracturing, though. Remember how we talked about how we were seeing a quote-unquote political distancing from Trump and his administration by some Republicans in yesterday's episode?
Yeah, yeah. But I think this time we should take a closer look at how some of the elected officials are handling this perceived fracture in the Republican Party. A
Mhm.
recent article by NBC curated a list of politicians who have broken with Trump to push for a presidential transition. It includes senators from Utah, Hamid Romney, Maine, Alaska, South Dakota, Florida, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania, as well as representatives from Michigan, Florida, Texas, New York, and Illinois.
Oh man, who's next? Go, 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 go.
Hey, hey.
We cannot
Yes, kill it.
we cannot forget the governors of Massachusetts, Vermont, Maryland, and Ohio.
Mm-hmm. All right, and this is just a small percentage of all the Republicans too, like a light appetizer, if you would.
Okay, so we can no longer describe it as a fracture because it's more like a light sprain or a little muscle spasm. It's not a fracture.
Yeah. They should have done some stretching beforehand.
A little bit.
Also, I'm not sure if folks heard, but very late last night, the New York Times, CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC News all called Arizona for Biden.
Oof, just one step closer, over 270. Okay. So, Miguel, what you're saying is it's not a high number of elected officials calling for a smooth presidential transition. Am I right with that? Okay.
Yep, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, every member of Congress should be easing facilitation in the transition of power. It's not only a matter of respecting and upholding the tenets of democracy, it's literally in their job description. Okay. And you do not get cookies for doing your job.
No cookies for them.
Mm-mm.
I will say though, with all the talk about post-election transition, sometimes it's easy to forget that there's a whole pandemic happening outside.
Okay, maybe for y'all, but not for me. Okay. I remember. From March to August, conversations surrounding COVID surpassed the total volume of conversations surrounding Trump and Biden. But over the last 30 days, the conversational volume surrounding COVID was not as high as conversations about Trump or Biden. But the news is getting a little bit back to normal, as y'all would say. And I will say that with the biggest quotation marks ever, like for sure.
Yes.
With rising COVID cases across the country, people are definitely wanting to hear how the Biden-Harris team plans to control the virus. And I really do not blame them. It's not like we've had a plan to control the virus in the last 9 months.
Yeah.
Okay. And also, one of the top pieces of content on stories about Biden is by the Daily Beast, framing Trump's refusal to concede as not only a threat to national security, but one that could potentially put more lives at risk of contracting the virus. However, conversations and messages about COVID are moving away from blaming the government's failure to control the spread of the virus and more towards blaming individuals, which seems kind of heartless, especially as folks are gearing up for the holidays.
Yeah. Some of the folks on Reddit would disagree on blaming individuals, though. Some top lines from the coronavirus subreddit call for government accountability. It seems like folks are getting behind the idea of a pandemic relief because a shutdown would do nothing but put even more people in more precarious positions with their housing, income, and other basic needs.
Yeah, I really need more stories to punch up at the government, right? And less backpedaling towards blaming individuals. People have lost their jobs, lost their health care. Some have even been evicted, okay? And yet we're blaming them because they're gathering with their loved ones. That's really cruel.
Yeah.
The reason why we haven't turned the corner, as the president used to say, is because of his administration's failure to contain the thing, okay?
I truly love your Trump impersonation.
I'm gonna miss doing it. I'm gonna miss doing it.
So I want to talk about opportunities. Our focus should definitely be on opportunities here. We can't wait for the other shoe to drop, and we have to make our demands known right now. The spikes we're seeing across the country are worse than what we saw across the country in the spring. Worse. And that's not good, y'all. It's not good at all.
No bueno.
We need to get back to our early pandemic messaging where we focused and uplifted the value of essential workers, whether they're healthcare workers, folks in hospitality or in the food industry, small businesses, teachers and daycare workers, everyone who's considered an essential worker. And if you need more ideas on how to frame your messaging, definitely check out Reframe's Rona Report, which can be found on their blog.
Yep. And as mentioned in the Rona Report, we need to ensure we uplift the fact that conversations focused on what labor is deemed essential often has racialized and gendered undertones. We need to ensure everyone, regardless of status, has protections in place, including pandemic relief, so that we can let the new administration take the lead and get us through this thing. It's been way past time, okay?
Been time. Whew. All right, y'all, that was a lot to get through. And remember, for everybody watching, you can always access previous episodes on Twitch at This Is Signals. Perfect the fact fallacy fact sandwich approach to inoculate against misinformation and disinformation by taking a look at the Disinfo Defense Toolkit curated by Reframe and PEN America for the Disinfo Defense League, and read the Rona Report, which you can find on Reframe's blog.
Come on, plug. I like how you just plugged that.
Hey, you know what? It's a shameless plug. You got to do it.
So you can also sign up to receive updates from us by signing up for our mailing list and subscribing to our channels for future seasons of Signals in the Noise. Future seasons, y'all. We're coming for y'all.
Hey.
Next week, we're partnering with Reframe to bring you 4 brilliant communication strategists who played key roles in key states during this election season. We'll be broadcasting from This Is Signals channels as well as Reframe channels, so keep your eyes peeled. You don't want to miss it.
I know that I'm subscribed because I don't want to miss a thing.
I guess we should just put it to you to just sing us out. I just want to say it's been really fun to run this pilot with y'all.
It's been great
doing this.
I had a blast.
I did too. Thanks so much for tuning in, y'all. Have a great, great, great weekend. Bye.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Happy holidays.
This is